down to earth. Do you remember? Why have we taken birth? Do you remember?
Good morning again. So this year, as many of you know, we're working with the theme of creating a world that works for all. We're kind of using this book by Sharif Abdullah as our a bit of a guidepost on it, and we're also taking a religious science look at that process. And the theme for this week, and as I mentioned last week, there's over 100 Science Mind churches around the country, around the world actually, that are working with this theme. And so we're exploring it as a group. We're exploring it as a group consciousness to see if we can have an effect on the world, a positive effect, and start to shift some things. So we here in Reading are part of a larger movement, a larger shift in consciousness. And so I invite you to participate fully as much as you can with that as we explore that. So the theme for this week is Suffer No More. And I love the wonderful quote from the reading today: the world has learned all it should through suffering. Wouldn't you agree? Amen. We've had enough, right? You know, suffering was the way to redemption or peace or whatever it is. We would all be, living in heaven and have A+ degrees and PhDs in suffering as a world. And I want to talk about suffering. So suffering from a religious science point of view, we would say, is resistance. It's resistance to the flow of the divine. It's resistance to the flow of the law. Now, what I want to say about that, because that can sound harsh, we say, well, what about children? What about this group of people here that has no possibility of they're being displaced by a larger group and like that? What I want to say is that suffering is a misalignment with the law, but it's not always our misalignment with the law. It's somebody's. It's somebody who's out of alignment with the law, and out of their greed, and out of their hurt, and out of their pain, and out of their fear, cause suffering in other people, as well as themselves. And sometimes we're at a point where we don't know how to deal with that, right? We've all sometimes been or felt powerless. Many of us as children have had experiences that we realized in looking backwards at the time, we had no way, other than the coping mechanisms we developed, of dealing with the suffering we were dealing with, right? Because we didn't have the wisdom of adults, we didn't have the freedom and the power and the ability to move around like adults. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah. Okay. And the same can be said for groups of people on this planet still. So one of my favorite sayings is when people say, well, it's like, I treated for this, I tried to make this happen, and it didn't happen. One of the things I remind us is we don't create in a vacuum. There's 7.5 billion other people on this planet also co-creating, right? And a lot of them co-creating pretty unconsciously. So we have to be aware that that's what's happening. We have to be aware also, however, that we as spiritually maturing adults are waking up to this and having the ability to claim our power to not only free ourselves, but then to turn and free others. In the Hindu tradition, the bodhisattvas learn how to free themselves of the illusion, the maya of life. And then they agree to come back and turn around and help others to gain that freedom. And we have the same obligation, we have the same responsibility. We have the responsibility first to free ourselves from suffering, from the illusion that suffering is a benefit, that's a good thing, because some of us got taught that. How many of us got taught that in early childhood, the churches, we grew up? I remember I grew up Catholic, as many of you know, and I read The Lives of the Saints, which is a big 3-volume set of books on, detailing the saints. And guess which were the best saints? The martyrs. The martyrs. the more you suffered, and if you died for your faith, and especially if you died badly for your faith, you got stoned to death or burned or drawn and quartered or crucified upside down, you were a better martyr. You were a better saint. That's a good thing to grow up with as a kid, right? Yeah, the more I suffer, the better I am. Some days I'm still trying to shake that one off. That stuff goes deep. Some modern-day Christians are still running around claiming that they're suffering. They're getting persecuted for their faith. And usually it's because they're trying to impose their ideas of faith on other people who don't believe the same things they are. And then they say, well, we're being persecuted because you're not doing it our way. Because you're not succumbing to our persecution of you. Don't buy into that one. Suffering is not natural. Ernest Holmes says that to suppose that the creative intelligence of the universe would create man or woman in bondage and leave them bound would be to dishonor the creative power which we call God. And yet a whole lot of religions have taught us that suffering is the way to heaven. You suffer on this earth to get a good reward in heaven later on, right? Many of you have heard this before. Okay? And it's not. There's no, what kind of a God, this is the thing that bothered me when I was in grade school. It's like, what kind of a God that's loving would send people to hell just because they never heard of him? For all of eternity to burn. Little babies that have just never heard of Jesus because they live too remotely. I don't believe in that God. I didn't believe in that God back then. There's a part of us that knows that that God doesn't exist. That's why most of us are here in a religious science church. That's why a whole lot of people, when they first walk into the doors of a New Thought church, start crying or having a kind of, oh my God, I'm home experience, because suddenly they hear people say that that's not the God we believe in either. We believe in a God that is love. We believe in a God that is good. We believe in a God that wants you to have the life that is the fullest expression of who you are and who you came here to be here now, not later then. Okay? So that's what we teach. That's a teaching that frees us from suffering, if we're willing to go there. And part of the process is we have to learn how to work with the laws. We have to learn how to work with the universe in order to do that. And so out of that then, we get to also, like I said, once we can establish that, once we can ground that to some degree in ourselves, we can free others. The challenge comes oftentimes is the people who have not first freed themselves, who have not first pierced the veil of the illusion, go and try to free others using the same processes that they already know how to do that didn't work in the first place. And so we're trying to shift that. We're trying to shift that process. So suffering isn't God ordained. It happens for two reasons. And both of them really are aspects of the same thing. Number one is we believe we are supposed to or have to suffer. We got conditioned early on that suffering is a good thing. Many of us still, we sit there and say, well, I don't believe in suffering, but if it isn't hard work, it's not really worthwhile doing. If I haven't earned it through some struggle, it's really not worthwhile. If something comes easy, do you sit there and go, well, yeah, that was nothing? Okay? What if it comes easy because that's how the universe was meant to be? Okay? We still reward people in many ways who struggle and work hard at things that don't necessarily have to be worked hard at. What if it could be easy? What if it could be done with, it takes effort, but effort is not necessarily the same as struggle. Effort is just a process that I put into doing it. Effort is, I watch Cynthia right now. Cynthia is playing with the watercolor class and at-home watercoloring. And there's an effort to put together the watercolors and mix the colors and tape the paper to the easel and to paint that. There's an effort involved, right? It doesn't just magically happen. But she loves it. She loves it. It's part of the process. Okay? And so there's an effort, but it's not a struggle. So first, we believe that we have to or are supposed to struggle. And then secondly, we or others who influence us misuse the law. And if we don't know how to stand in our own power, we're the ones who get mowed over by other people misusing the law. If we do know how to use our own power, we set ourselves up by misusing the law. And the law is always working. As one of my teachers used to say, the law doesn't care whether you're ignorant of it or not. It's always working. So the one-year-old who toddles to the end of a high platform and falls off is ignorant of the law of gravity, but guess what? The law of gravity is still working, and the consequences are the same. So the law is, the core of the law is what you put out comes back to you. What you put out returns. Every spiritual teacher from the beginning of time has taught us this. It's the law of what's called cause and effect. What I put out into the world is what comes back to me. So take a breath. Because if we really get aware of that, if we really start to get aware of that, what is it that I'm putting out into the world on a regular basis? If I listen quietly to my thoughts, the lower volume, the lower frequency thoughts, by frequency I don't mean necessarily bad, but the quieter ones, the ones that kind of run underneath the surface. What am I really saying to myself, and what am I really putting out? Oh, I don't think I'm good enough. I know something's wrong with me. I'll never really succeed at that. No matter how good I do, it'll never be good enough. That sort of stuff. Anybody besides me ever have those? Yeah, okay. Hopefully it's not just me. So just like gravity, it works. Ernest says if we talk about discord, we shall become more discordant. The more the world arms for war, the more certain it is there will be war. People who spend all their time talking about their unhappiness become more unhappy. Okay? So we have to first of all check in. How am I using the law? What am I putting out? Am I creating my own suffering by the ideas and thoughts that I hold in my mind that are showing up out here? And if we're not living in a state of joy, and by joy it doesn't necessarily have to be an exuberant, wow, all the time, but just a kind of a quiet contentment and joy, we're probably putting out things that are thoughts that are not healthy and are setting us up for our own suffering. We live in a world that has believed in war as a solution for millennia. And have we noticed that it doesn't work? And when will we notice that? We don't tend to look for alternatives. Eleanor Roosevelt years ago said, when will our consciences grow so tender that we will act to prevent human misery instead of avenge it? We will act to prevent human misery instead of avenge it. See, a great deal of the suffering that's going on in the world, a great deal of the fighting that's going on in the world, is people avenging other people for what they think was wrong that was done, oftentimes hundreds of years ago. Oftentimes hundreds of years ago. And we keep on doing it, and we keep on doing it, and we keep wondering why it doesn't work. Sharif Abdullah says that compassion is the tool that will create the change in the world. Compassion. And compassion is a form of love. And when we start to contemplate that, we remember that God is love. When we recognize that God is love, and we start to act with compassion, and we start to act with love, okay, we start to align ourselves with and enact the nature of God, of who we truly are. And so the question we get to dance with is, how loving can I be in my life? How much love for myself and others? See, Jesus gave us two laws. When he was asked, of all the laws, and if you've ever read Leviticus, Deuteronomy, I think it's Numbers, and a bunch of that, there's like thousands of laws that the Jewish people were supposed to be following, okay? And they said, well, which is the most important law? And he says, there's two. And both those laws called for love. Love God. And where is God? Within us and all around us. Where is God? It's within us and all around us. So we love God with our entire whole heart, whole being, wholeness. And then the other one was the same. He says it's like unto the first one. Love your neighbor, not as much as yourself, or not in a similar way to yourself, but as yourself. Because guess what? Your neighbor and you are one. You and your neighbor, you and I are one. It's the two laws. If we were to follow those laws, we would create heaven right here on earth right now. And so the invitation this week is to practice love. To practice that law of love. Of everything else we put out. Can I go to my work and can I love my work? Can I come to my home and love my home? Can I practice being more loving to my partner? Can I practice being more loving to myself? Can I practice being more loving to the people I meet on the street? You know, last week there was the invitation to, can I see the God in each person that I see, that I meet? Can I see the embodiment of God? See, if I see the embodiment of God in each person that I meet, I'm going to start treating that person with love. I told the story yesterday in the intentions retreat of and some of you have heard this story before, I know, but of a monastery that used to be very prosperous and very wealthy and had plenty of monks, beautiful grounds. People from the nearby village would come and camp on or picnic on the grounds and have a wonderful time. And it was a very wonderful experience for people. Eventually the monastery began to deteriorate, and fewer monks were joining, and fewer people were becoming monks, and finally it was down to just 4 monks. And the grounds were kind of not kept up very well because it got away from them and they were getting older. And they said, we got to do something here, otherwise we're going to be it. This monastery could completely end with us, the 4 of us. What can we do? They were aware that in the woods nearby there was a hut. And in the hut a rabbi would come oftentimes from the local town and sit in prayer and meditation. They decided that Father Abbot from their monastery would go talk to the rabbi and see if they could get some suggestions for what to do. And so pretty soon, being intuitive as they were, they felt and were aware that the rabbi was in the hut. And so Father Abbot went over and knocked on the door and said, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I wondered if I could talk. And so they sat down. He said, yes, come in, have some tea, and we'll sit and talk. And so Father Abbot talked about the beauty of what was once they had as the monastery, but how it's deteriorated, how it's fallen apart, and they don't know what to do. And the rabbi said, yes, I understand. It's the same in our order. It's the same with the rabbis. It's like all the brilliant ones have kind of come and gone, and we're kind of deteriorating, and we're not sure what to do either. And so they commiserated together, and so eventually Father Abbot said, thank you very much for your time and for listening and caring. And the rabbi said, you're welcome. And so Father Abbot took off, and the rabbi said, good luck to you. And just as he closed the door, he says, oh, by the way, and the Father Abbot was just at the gate of the property, and he says, by the way, one of you is the Messiah. One of you is the Messiah. Closed the door. And so, of course, the Father Abbot is like, what? One of us is the Messiah? So he goes back to the monastery, and everybody wants to know, what did he talk about? What did he talk about? And he says, well, he didn't have any real ideas either, and we just kind of commiserated about the challenges. He said, but he said something weird right at the end. He said, one of us is the Messiah. One of us, one of the 4 of us is the Messiah. And they started thinking about this later on, and they said, well, it's got to be Father Abbot. I mean, he's the one who's been here the longest, and he's the holiest of all of us. But what if it's not? What if it's that cranky old brother Jerome? He's always nasty to everybody. What if it's him? Oh my God, maybe we should be nicer to him. What if it's Brother Fred? That kind of, he's not exactly the sharpest knife in the drawer, but what if it's me? Oh my God, maybe I should get up on my spiritual practice and be better and be more open to it. And they started to do that. They started to contemplate that it might be one of themselves. It might be themselves. It might be one of the other 3. And they started treating each other as the Messiah. And pretty soon, people started coming back from the village to camp on the grounds, to picnic on the grounds. And eventually a young man knocked on the door and said, what is it you do here? I'd like to study that. It feels right here. I just can feel it. And pretty soon the monastery started to thrive again. What if one of you was the Messiah? What if one of the people that you meet on the street is the Messiah? How would you act? What if you're it? How would you be? I invite you to play with that question this week. One of the practices that we do that takes us quickly out of love and compassion is judging. Judging others, judging ourselves. When we judge, we move out of alignment with the law and we suffer. Have you ever met a happy person who's judgmental? Have you? Nope. Have you ever met a judgmental person who has happy people and friends around them? That really want to hang around with them? Okay. So one of the ways to move out of judgment is to pay attention to whom and to why we judge. Rumi says, why are you knocking at every other door? Go knock at the door of your own heart. Go knock at the door of your own heart. I want to invite you this week to take on a practice that's going to shine the light on the dark corners of our own mind, which is not always a comfortable thing to do, but it starts to bring us out. It starts to open us up. It starts to undo the suffering that we're both creating and experiencing. There's a sheet that the ushers have when you leave. Hang on one second as I dig it out here. That it's called the Judge Your Neighbor Worksheet. It's not a worksheet on how to judge your neighbor more effectively. It's a worksheet on when you catch yourself judging, to start paying attention and to start understanding what are the underlying causes of that. What is it that's going on? So there's a wonderful old proverb that says, when I point a finger out, I've got three pointed back at me. This worksheet is actually based on that proverb right there. And so it's a chance to take that and explore that. What is it that as I'm pointing out to you is actually happening for me? And so it's going to help us to look at both how we judge and turn it around to free us. Not turn it around to make us feel bad or feel guilty, but turn it around to start to free us. So I'm going to invite you to, when you're leaving, to take one of these worksheets. And if you would like to, I'll spend a little bit of time right after the service back over in that area there to walk through some instructions and some guidance on how to fill this out. Okay? It'll take about 5 minutes to kind of walk through it, and we can just go through that process. So if you're willing to, if you're interested in it, I invite you to take one or two. If you know that you're a judgmental person, take 3 or 4. We won't judge you about that. Okay? But to take one, and you can make more copies as you want to start to work with, how can I take that judging layer, that layer of where I'm out of alignment with the universe, I'm out of alignment with love, and start to take it down in my life a bit. Start to peel it off. So I'm going to invite you to play with that this week. What I want to say is it's going to take courage to do that. It's not necessarily going to be comfortable. But if we're serious about creating a world that works for all, and a spiritual community that works for all, we'll do the work we need to do to free ourselves. Okay? Because this is a place where the rubber starts to meet the road. Am I willing to do this? Am I willing to do this kind of work? See, the thing is that I know we all judge. We all have some degree of judgmentalism going along. I do. I'm willing to bet that probably every person in this room, and you know, has some degree of it, some high, some low, but we all judge at some points in time. And the less we can do that, the more in alignment with that law of love, the more in alignment with being able to see the Christ consciousness in ourselves and each other we're able to see, the clearer our vision gets. So the question is, do you really want to get involved with a world that works for all, or do you want to stay comfortable? So this week, I invite you as a spiritual practice to one, just notice where you have believed in suffering. For those of you who were like me, raised on suffering as a virtue, you come from a tradition of where the nuns would roll themselves in glass and self-flagellate, and the priests would do some of the same thing in the older days. If you were raised with the belief in suffering is a good thing, just notice that. Just listen. Just watch as you walk through your life where you believe in suffering as a virtue, and maybe start to unhook from that, okay? Because it's not. Secondly, Notice where you experience suffering by being out of alignment with the law. And sometimes it helps to have help from a practitioner or a spiritual coach in doing that, because if we're having the same experience over and over again and we're suffering from it and we don't know how to get out of it, it might be time to call in somebody else who has a higher viewpoint or a trained viewpoint to take a look at that and help us to work it through. Okay? So that's the second thing. Where am I suffering by being out of alignment with the law, and seeing if I need help with that. And then finally, just be willing to practice love and compassion this week. So that's our spiritual practice. Notice where we believe in suffering. Notice where we're experiencing it by being out of alignment with the law, and practicing love and compassion. Would you be willing to work with that this week? Yes. Great. I want to close with a quote from Ernest. Man must be created with the possibility of limitless freedom and let alone to discover himself. On the road to self-discovery, he must be subject to the law of reality. And if in ignorance he violates the law, he must thereby suffer. This is not, however, because any divine decree ordains suffering, but simply is the necessity of the case. If we have a law, and if we move out of alignment with it, we suffer. That's just the necessity of the case. God never intended man to suffer. You were not born to suffer. That wonderful phrase is, you suffer through life and then you die. Life is a whatever and then you die, is not the truth. And so I invite you this week to let go of suffering, both for yourself and also to hold that as a path for the world, to help others to let go of suffering as much as you can. Let's move into prayer. So I recognize that there is that one infinite presence. There's pure love, pure compassion, pure good, perfect freedom, and a divine order and harmony that is consistent, that is in alignment, that is always working, and always working for our highest and greatest expression of good. And that we are one of that. Because that presence is all there is, we must always be within that presence, within that one life. And so we ourselves are that love. We ourselves are that compassion. This is our nature already. When we're invited to become more compassionate, we're invited to become more of who we already are, the truth of who we are. And we ourselves are within that law and know and understand that law. There is that within us which knows and understands and is in alignment with that law consistently. And so I speak my word that we move our whole being into alignment with that law, into alignment with our love, into alignment with our compassion, into alignment with the good, with the freedom that we have to live and express that love here on this planet. Because we are free to move about this planet expressing love. We are free. We release the bonds of any past suffering, past belief in suffering, past actions that have caused suffering in ourselves and each other, and right now shift our consciousness and shift our thinking, knowing that as we shift it in this moment, it creates new moments for us going forward. We do not have to stay stuck where we have been. And so in gratitude for each person who is playing with this dance, in gratitude for each person who is moving into a greater expression of love and compassion, I release this word into a law that moves it into form, moves it into expression in the most beautiful, wonderful ways possible in our lives, right here and right now. And it does. And together we anchor that by saying, and so it is. And so you are, and so we are. Thank you.